Anne is a member of the IPU's Committee on the Human Rights of Parliamentarians, which does a phenomenal job on a global basis in defending the rights of parliamentarians, those who've suffered from oppression, from torture, and in far too many cases, death. I'm sure Anne will tell us a little bit about that as we proceed. We're also pleased to have with us the campaigns officer of the Burma campaign, Waihnin Pwint Thon, if I've said that correctly, or close enough. Maybe you can tell us if she's going to speak to us in a few moments. And then Mike Harris, who's the head of Advocacy at the Index on Censorship.
And I sit on a committee which considers the human rights of parliamentarians all over the world. And we get information about their situations from the various countries, very often from Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, or from other organisations, sometimes from individuals, and they flag up people whose rights as elected members are being undermined in some way by the country in which they're elected members. Sometimes they've disappeared, sometimes unfortunately they've also died, sometimes they're in prison, and sometimes they have some kind of restriction placed on them, so they're not able, as we are here, and as are so many members of Parliament in other countries, able to say what we want, when we want, where we want. And that's a big disadvantage if you're not able to do that, if there's some constraint on you. So it's our responsibility as people who have those freedoms to flag up those members of Parliament all over the world who may not have those freedoms. But I think it's important that we as parliamentarians in democratic countries who are able to speak out, to criticise, to meet with other people if we wish, speak up for people in countries where this does not happen. The work of the committee has expanded a lot since it was set up in 1976, particularly as the committee's got better known and more highly regarded. For instance, at the last IPU assembly in Kampala in Uganda in April of this year, we looked at the individual situations of 201 sitting or former parliamentarians from 39 countries in all the regions of the world, which included 5 new cases, and we held 13 hearings with representatives of those countries from the relevant national parliament who were present. And the resolution submitted to the Governing Council of the IPU for its approval concerned cases in 26 countries, including Burundi, Cambodia, Colombia, Iraq, Mongolia, Palestine, Israel, the Russian Federation, Sri Lanka and Turkey. Since its creation, the committee has contributed to the satisfactory settlement of a large proportion of more than 1,600 cases in some 100 countries.
So 2 years ago, when I talk about the situation in Burma, or when I tell someone that I'm from Burma, replies from most people were like, "Oh, I know Burma. Isn't there that woman? Oh, I can't pronounce her name. Isn't she under house arrest?" So I say, yes, she's called Aung San Suu Kyi, and she's under house arrest. But nowadays, when I talk about Burma, people get very excited and say, "Oh, things been changing very quickly. There are lots of changes going on in Burma," and we, as you may know, many of you were here when Aung San Suu Kyi did her speech in Westminster Hall, which was amazing. and marvelous. And many of the high-profile political prisoners been released, and many of the things been changing, some of the laws being reformed, and there are now Aung San Suu Kyi is an elected member of the parliament in Burma, so things been changing very quickly. So if I have to start with my personal story, my father was one of the high-profile activists in Burma. He was first arrested in 1989. He was just a student in 1988, and he was involved in uprising, asking for democracy, peace and reform in the country. But as a result, he was arrested and sentenced for 8 years in prison. My father was very active, and again there was another uprising in 2007, and they were leading the uprising and they were arrested. We knew that my father and his friends would be arrested, and we thought that it would be 25 years maximum sentence, but he and his friends were sentenced to 65 years. I thought that I would never see my father again in my life, because there was no communication, and he was very ill. He was denied medical treatment as long as other political prisoners. But there was a good news. Aung San Suu Kyi was released in 2010, and there were more and more political prisoners were released in 2010, 11. And finally, in 2012, January, this year, my father was released. That was one of the happiest moments in my life. It's very good to be happy. I'm happy because my father is released, and now he is very active. I can't stop him. He is everywhere in Burma, meeting with ethnic representatives. He is meeting with different people and trying to bring proper reform in the country. But he and other activists can be put back to prison if the president of Burma decides to do so. So all the privilege lies with the president, and if he wants to change something, if he wakes up this morning, I want to change the parliament and I want to paint the parliament into yellow, he could do that. So all the reforms in Burma are going on according to his decision. It's not the decisions come from MPs or people in Burma can't express what they really want to do, and all the repressive laws still remain in place. So I would like to say that it is very good to be optimistic, but at the same time there has to be a proper caution in place, because it doesn't go wrong to put caution in what we are hoping for the change in Burma. And we still need your help. We still need people to get involved and ask for the release of the unconditional release of all political prisoners in Burma, and also the proper dialogue with ethnic representatives, Aung San Suu Kyi and the president, of what really needs to be happening in Burma. Unless those things happen, there won't be proper change. So we are just taking a baby step, and we are starting our first step, and we still need your support to go together with our journey. So please don't abandon us, because we still need you, and there are still a long way to go. Thank you.
Index on Censorship works in 15 countries across the globe, including Burma. And I want to make a number of short points on this topic. I think, firstly, it's worth considering the question, who is a politician, when we answer this question. I also want to emphasise the importance of parliamentarians arming themselves with facts. And lastly, I'd like to emphasise the importance of solidarity with jailed politicians. So on the question of who is political, many of those that we would consider politicians are often either eligible to stand in elections, or their political parties are banned. So they have to group informally in structures that they themselves will describe as NGOs or civil society. These political groups will not behave like Western political parties, and their behaviour will often strike Western observers, including parliamentarians, as counterproductive. Many will pull out of political participation, especially as the internal situation in countries gets worse. To maintain respectability, these restrictive laws will often be used sparingly, and only against those deemed to pose the greatest threat to the stability of the regime, which is often opposition politicians. So many opposition politicians will have criminal records, allowing the regime to effectively run counter-propaganda aimed at Western audiences or Western politicians to discourage meetings. Some opposition political activists, such as Azerbaijan's Emin Milli, have had drugs planted on them to discredit them. And in many of the Arab Spring countries, the politically active, those who could become parliamentarians, were often accused and arrested for assaulting women or rape, knowing this would make it highly unlikely for Western donors or Western parliamentarians to meet with them or fund their work. Democratic politicians should always arm themselves with the facts so they can argue convincingly against such propaganda. Laws such as criminal defamation continue to be used against MPs.